Vivek, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm so excited to chat with you today. Like,
Me
this is,
too.
I have the book right here. Everyone, we're chatting today about the Subtweet, and we're talking about the inimitable body of work Vivek Shraya has created. Um, she's just, you're so iconic. I'm so excited that
Oh,
you're
that's
here
so
today.
nice. Thank you for having me. This is really, really nice.
And this is like a page turner, guys. Like, if this isn't turned into like an HBO show sometime or like an Amazon show, I don't know what can be, because this is just so spicy. Let me start with an intro with Vivek. I'm going to read from the back cover.
Okay.
Vivek Shraya is an artist whose body of work crosses the boundaries of music, literature, visual art, theater, and film. Her best-selling book, I'm Afraid of Men, was heralded by Vanity Fair as cultural rocket fuel, and her album with Queer Songbook Orchestra, Part-Time Woman, was nominated for the Polaris Music Prize. She's one half of the music duo Two Attached and the founder of the publishing imprint VS Books, a five-time Lambda Literary Award finalist. Vivek has also received honors from the Writers' Trust of Canada and the Publishing Triangle. She's a director on the board of Tegan and Sarah Foundation and an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Calgary. Just very accomplished. You are making me really proud.
Oh, thank you.
As per usual. Sarah of Tegan and Sarah said, so engaging about this book. I can't think of anything I've read that has captured Twitter culture so well. There's something special in this book that really touches on the absurdity and pressure of social media and art. I couldn't put it down. So I'll pause there. That's a lot of me talking. Vivek, can you please introduce your amazing book and tell us a little bit about it before I dive in with the Q&A?
Sure, yeah. So this is the Subtweet, and I love what you said about it being an HBO show, because I definitely wrote it thinking about it from the lens of like TV or movies. So I mean, let's just put that out on the universe vision board or whatever.
Anybody listening, I'll just pass this along to some of my TV friends.
Yes, please. Yeah, so I mean, basically a couple years ago, I just, my feelings about the internet have really changed. Like, I think in like 2005, 2006, 2007, Twitter and, even Facebook, there were all these platforms that felt like quote unquote fun. And as a way to like learn perspectives that I hadn't been exposed to, democratize the kinds of content and news that we were getting. Suddenly I saw like other brown people in my feed, and I could choose who I wanted to listen to or see. But in the past couple of years, I would say that my feelings about the internet have gotten a lot less romantic, in that I've just seen the ways that personally, the internet has impacted my mental health negatively, just from like constantly comparing, what you're doing to what someone else is doing. And then also things like call out culture and, just envy and that sort of thing. And so I really wanted to, and I also just found that the internet just stopped being a place to have conversation. I grew up during like the live journal time, where it was like really about like, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. And, you get to write these like long posts, whereas now everything's condensed into a short tweet. And yeah, with that, a lot of nuance is lost. And so I wanted to write a book that sort of captured like this sort of particular moment of, what does it mean to create relationships and sustain relationships with this ominous kind of like third party that's always looming? What does it mean for you to like meet someone new, but then be able to like access all this information about them through the internet or social media? So, I mean, and I also really wanted to center brown women. For me, that was like a big like agenda for me, was like I wanted it to center two brown women, and then also feature and highlight South Asian diasporic art, because like this particular moment where South Asians are making incredible work and using the internet to deploy their work, if that makes sense.
That's amazing. I'm so excited. Like, this is just a page turner. And I also want to take a moment. Speaking of South Asian art, this is Manjeet Thap, right?
Yeah.
How did that collaboration come to be? Such a provocative, even like, cover.
Thanks for saying it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that when when the publisher and I started to talk about the cover for the book, I was like, I would really love to see brown women on the cover. And so I imagined like maybe four brown women, just, and I think that there's like, you go into a bookstore and you always see these, like, especially with like period books, there's like these like older white ladies in like a beautiful gown that's like on a cover. And I was like, let's kind of like subvert that a little bit. And they did this amazing research, the publisher, and they like found like 50 South Asian artists on like Instagram and social media, And one of them actually happened to be Manju. And I follow her and I'm a huge fan of hers. And I was like, whoa, this would be perfect. And so I scrolled through her Instagram and I found this image of this woman who just looks, you know, kind of like a boss. And I love the sort of play of the phone as well. Like, you know, the thing that I worried about with a book called The Subtweet, is that it would have like this like 90s internet font, you know, and I didn't want that. And I was like, I didn't want it to look too contemporary in this like kind of cheesy way. And so I liked that she had a phone, which is still a nod to like technology, but kind of like nostalgic in a way for communication that used to be. So anyways, we reached out to her and she said yes, which is awesome. And I'm so thrilled because I'm a huge fan of her work.
It's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about your characters. So there's a character named Neela and a character named Rukmini, and they're the two main protagonists. And we're going to try not to do spoilers, guys, because you really have to read this book. Like, please support and go purchase from your local bookseller. You know, go for it. I think I bought a Kindle and a hardcover because I was like, I need the physical copy too.
Oh, that's so nice.
During this live. So please do support. Like, I don't say it lightly. I'm an avid reader, and this had me hooked from page one.
Oh, that's really, really nice.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, I don't know if you can see all the books that are just sitting around on my shelf. There's a lot going on here. But so let's talk about these characters, Neela and Rukmini, and we're going to try not to do spoilers, but what's really amazing about the way you've constructed the characters is that they're kind of almost perfect foils. Neela is this artist who believes in originality and believes like, why would I ever listen to anybody else? Like, I need to come up and create with something original. Rukmini, on the other hand, is actually a journalist by day, and at night, like, is in her basement sitting and covering other people's songs. So talk to me about this character development for other people who might be, you know, aspiring novelists or writers. How did you choose what to imbue each with, and what were you surprised by like having those characters kind of play together at the end of it in this novel?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges of writing women is that, you know, with women, first of all, there's so few books that feature like women relationships, but like, or friendships that center friendship as opposed to like romantic relationships. But then second, I think that a lot of, there's just a lot of tropes when it comes to women relationships. So you have, you know, the woman that is older versus the woman that's younger, or you have the woman that's smarter versus the woman that's not as smart, or the prettier woman versus the less pretty woman, or the more talented woman versus you know, the ingenue. And these are sort of tropes that we see in the way that women are depicted all the time in the relationship. And I was like, I want both of these women to be different, obviously, but I want them to be quote unquote equal. And so how do I create tension between women? Because I think tension is real and honest. And how do I create difference between these women? Because difference is real and honest, but without playing into these like tropes of like, well, one is older and one is like younger and stuff. And so, you know, where I sort of got was that, you know, Neela would be someone who is like very much driven by this desire for authenticity and originality, and her central issue is feeling not appreciated enough or not successful enough. She's very much got this sort of like indie kind of like support, but she's not seen in this particular way. And then you have Rukmini, who's not really interested in originality. She's a cover artist, but she has enormous popularity, but she wishes that she like had that sort of singular talent. And so I wanted them to sort of be equal in the way of success. Like, one could argue that they're both successful in different ways, but that inside both of them were sort of not feeling as successful as the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And what I loved about that setup also was, I mean, I'm not trying to compare, I'm not trying to compare it because I know that's also very problematic, but it really reminded me a lot of Elena Ferrante's, like, you know, have you read her quadrilogy about like My Best Friend? Or
I haven't, no.
Okay.
I should.
So
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to, but what was really interesting is like, I think she also tries to pursue this thing. And that's what I really loved about it, where it's like two equals who both have different talents, but like, you know, one person's talent goes more recognized than the other. And what do you do when that happens? Because it's not really about, intrinsic ability. It's more exactly what the world of the subtweet is. It's like outside perception colliding with what's real, you know, what's real.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, my beautiful friend. Anthony says, love, love, love. We also had a
Ah.
question. I don't know if you can answer this,
Yeah, sure.
if this is like too
Why did I
spoilery.
decide to? Well, this is a little spoilery, but I love this question.
Yes.
I think part of the thing about a friend breakup, so one of the things I really wanted to explore was friend breakups. And the thing about a friend breakup is that, like, unlike a romantic relationship where there's sort of, and again, romantic relationship breakups can go wrong as well, but there are certain things in place, like culturally we even know that texting someone while dumping them is technically not the right thing to do. Like culturally we understand that, whereas with friendship breakups, like the friendship breakups I've had, people have just like ghosted, like just completely ghosted, or you just kind of purposely fade away from each other, and or you have a giant fight. But there's this strange sort of, there's no real social accountability to friends in the weird, in this weird way, in terms of a dissolution of a relationship, which is heartbreaking because with friends often sometimes you're talking about 5 years, you're talking about 10 years, you're talking about 15 years, and then suddenly you just stop talking. And I really wanted the novel to capture that. I wanted to capture what it means to like stop talking to someone and then essentially just lose them completely. And with this book also, I wanted, the sort of third chapter called Workmany starts off with the line of something like, as soon as Workmany disappeared, I became more visible. And so what I also wanted to talk about was how with marginalized artists, so often our visibility is often tied to the invisibility of another. That it's often the invisibility of certain people or the lack of visibility of certain people that allow for us to be visible in a tokenistic culture that believes that only one of us is allowed or enough. And so I wanted both of those tensions to show the way that visibility is tied to invisibility. And I wanted to show the sort of like real emotional loss of having a friend, losing a friend. Does that sort of, I hope that answers your question.
That's a
Hi,
very
hi, these are so
eloquent
nice.
Yeah, everyone loves you, Vivek.
Oh, this is
Um,
really, really nice. Hi.
Feel free to keep adding questions. We are going to answer them. This isn't just
Sure,
us
yes, I will
two.
answer anything.
I love that. Um, Another theme that I really love that you talk about is just, the problem, the problems of, we started talking about this internet culture. There's so many things you say that are just these like one line zingers. I wrote them down all on my phone, unfortunately, so I can't even read them out loud. But like one of them was like, oh, maybe like the only real thing is like blah. And like, you talk a lot about internet culture, and we started talking about that, and how it's changed a lot, and how people are, really obsessed with like likes and followership counts and all of that stuff. So in today's world, let's bring you to today. How do you navigate your internet culture today? I used to have a Zanga, so I really relate to the live journal thing. How do you relate to internet culture today to keep your mental health sane? And what are some practices you take on?
I mean, honestly, like my relationship to social media, like I said, has been really hard on me, especially because, yeah, like I said, there's like the obvious like comparison stuff, and even especially during the pandemic, like I find like I go on social media and like people who are like making bread and doing their crafts, like I find myself like, meanwhile, I'm like just kind of like I don't have the energy or the motivation to do anything, and I find when I go on social media, I actually just feel terrible because I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not discovering bread recipes? Like, why am I not like making origami or like, you know what I mean? And so I think for me, I've had to like set parameters. So for instance, right now during the pandemic, I've been like, you can check your socials 3 times a week and that's it. And like you go in, you do your whatever, like I try to be like quote unquote, um, I try to use social media in a community kind of way, in that if I'm self-promoting, for everything I self-promote, I try to share like at least three other art people's or artists' content or information, so that way it's not just me all the time. So I go in, I share other people's stuff, I share my stuff if I need to. I like certain stuff, so I'm showing support, and then I sign off because I find otherwise, and I also have my apps deleted off my phone because it's so, I find that when it's on your phone, you just like, you're in the bathroom or you're waiting for a bus or whatever, and you just constantly automatically go on it. And I find if I delete the app, it's one extra step to have to like upload the app again, if that makes sense. So, I mean, that's where I'm at with it right now, is I just really try taking breaks. I also try and remember that I'm not entitled to someone's digital space. Like, I think it's really important that if we are on these platforms, that we start thinking them as real. I think we give ourselves too much permission because we're like, oh, this is virtual, it doesn't exist. And so what that means is that we put all kinds of expectations and ideas and assumptions on people's virtual spaces and virtual identities. And the thing is, we actually don't know someone just because we follow them. Even like, you know, just because we see someone's photos, just because we see what someone's posting, we actually don't know what that means in terms of their politics, in terms of how they feel, in terms of how they're doing. And also, you know, just because you follow someone doesn't mean you're entitled to them following you back. Like, those are the things that I try and keep in mind, because sometimes I go to a very tender place where I'm like, how come, you know, this thing is getting so many likes, or how come this person doesn't follow me back? And it's like, actually, like, we all signed up for this thing or these things, but again, none of us are entitled to having that kind of reciprocity, if that makes sense.
You're
Sorry,
so
that was a rant.
insightful. You're so insightful. Do you have like a Neela or a Rukmini in your life? Have some of these experiences played out in your own personal experiences?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Neela was definitely inspired. I mean, all the women in the book, to be honest, like, you know, one of the things in the book that felt really important was not to have romantic relationships, to really, really center friendship. Because, and, you know, thinking a bit about the Alison Bechdel test of like, you know, women, whenever they're together, they have to talk about men, or conversely, they have to talk about relationships. And I was like, you know, the thing is, I'm so fortunate that like so many of my women friends in our 30s, when we sit together and hang out, we don't really talk about our love lives. We talk about our careers, we talk about our art, we talk about food, we talk about racism, we talk about white supremacy. Like, there's a lot of things that we talk about before we talk about our relationships. And sure, sometimes love comes up, sure, sometimes relationships come up. But I think that like women, and brown women especially, we have so much to talk about that isn't just relationships. So Neela was definitely inspired by like the single women in my life who, you know, are powerful, are strong, are confident. You know, like, I heard from certain people in the industry that Neela made them very uncomfortable as a character. So when thinking about publishing the book, it was like people found her kind of dislikable or unlikable because she's confident and because she's self-assured. And so, you know, for me, I was like, that's why she's important, right? Is because we want women to be confident, but to a point. We want women to be confident, but ultimately humble, right? And so Neela was very much inspired by women in my life who are like unabashedly ambitious, unabashedly confident. And Rukmini was also inspired by like the extroverts in my life, like the super people who are like super friendly, who love to go out for coffees, like the people who aren't like me in a lot of ways. So yeah, definitely inspired from people around me.
Vandana asked a few scrolls back about how do you create an equitable space for everyone, because I know you talked about this also in our article, the wonderful feature by Dhruva Balram, which you should read,
Yeah.
about Vivek. You talk a lot about, you know, the music industry and tokenism, and it's used as a marketing tool. So I guess I have two questions. One, how, like, specifically the music industry, how can they not just partake in tokenism, but actually give space to creators? And second, how do we in general, beyond the music industry, create spaces for people without tokenism? It seems like people aren't doing that really well right now, all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because anytime I get invited to do anything in a panel, especially in a panel format or a reading, like, my first thought is like, am I getting invited because I'm a musician, or am I getting invited because I check off a lot of boxes? You know, as a trans, queer, brown artist, I do check off a lot of boxes, and like often it means that I am only getting invited, especially once I show up to a panel and it's me and three white women or three white men. It's like, oh right, that's what I'm here for. But I think it's like also just less about me and like the artist, because I think so much of when we think about tokenism, we think about like the front people, which is like often the artist. But I think, when we think about the industry, it's like, who are the people in the rooms making the decisions, right? Like, it's no wonder that panels or events feature dominantly white artists, because the people in the rooms making those decisions are also white. So making sure that, like, I think every level of the industry is diversified, for the lack of a better word. So, you know, the people making the decisions, You know, the people, even the people taking the photos, right? Like there's something, you know, there's this conversation in the subtweet where like the three brown women talk about how, well, like, what would it be like to be photographed by a brown person? And like, you know, sort of thinking about the brown lens and how so many of us come to understand ourselves through a white lens. And that's why, you know, I've been such an advocate of selfies, because it's through, you know, flipping the lens on itself and, you know, conducting the lens myself, that I've been able to find love for myself. And so, you know, anyways, to go back to your question, I just think it's so important that we think about tokenism on every level, and not just, you know, the sort of front facing part, if that makes sense.
You have said the most thoughtful like reasoning for selfies I've ever heard before. Like, I used to think, oh my God, selfies are so self-indulgent, but what you're saying is it's actually a way you view yourself, and that's actually really powerful. And I'm gonna rethink selfies from now on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard because you go on social media and you're like, oh my God, another selfie from so and so, or like, I feel that way sometimes, and it's like, these people are really narcissistic, but it's like, actually, like, for me, selfies have been a way to like show self-love, right? Like this is actually such an interesting moment, because for one of the first times in our cultural history that I can think of, like brown and black and indigenous people have the power to actually show themselves through their own gaze, as opposed to through the gaze and lens of another. And that to me is like what the selfie is doing. And I think, yeah, I'm here for it.
I also want to spend the next part of our Q&A talking a little bit about who you were when you were younger. So, as a writer, who are some of your inspirations? Like, what did you read growing up? Like, have any of them influenced you today into adulthood, or were you kind of reacting against certain things you've read before? You're like, I definitely don't want to be that. I'd love to hear that.
I mean, I definitely loved Nancy Drew growing up, and
Yes.
I was especially into her friend who, like, was it George, who had like the gender non-conforming name? Like, it
Yeah.
was like, and like that to me was like, I was so obsessed with like a woman named George, I think, and but I also like how like Nancy Drew was like so tenacious and just like, you know, she kind of reminded me of Penny from Inspector Gadget. I don't know if you've seen Inspector Gadget, but
I have.
yeah. But you know, I think the books that like I always credit as like sort of making me a writer, if you will, was Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. That was the first book by a person of color that I read in my entire academic history, from like kindergarten or grade 1 to like university, as far as I know. And it just really blew my mind. I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing this entire time. Like, this is what it means to read work by someone of color. So that was like incredibly illuminating. And a couple years after, I ended up reading a book called Stone Butch Blues by Toni Morrison. By Leslie Feinberg. And again, I had a similar reaction where I was like, oh, like this is what LGTB literature is. Like I'd never read anything by a gay author before, especially in school, or a queer author or trans author. And so I think those two books, Stone Butch Blues and The Bluest Eye, just like had such a significant impact on me, and was like, and I often credit as being the books that were like, oh, I want to tell my own story. Like I think that there's so much power in our stories.
Amazing. And then Vivek, tell me a little bit about the writing process. I bet there's a bunch of aspiring writers out there. How do you even sit down and write a novel? Like, what's your process?
I mean, I'm laughing because right now I'm trying to like write, and of course, like on top of not being able to make bread, I can't write either.
Don't say
I I don't know. You know, it's such a strange thing. Like I've been making like art for 18 years, and like with songs, it's like I can sit a cappella or with a guitar or a piano and like probably pump out a song in a few hours. But I find writing just so challenging. Like the art of coming up with a sentence, and a sentence that's meaningful and exciting and inspiring, just like can take a whole day. And so it often feels like you don't have enough to show for how much work you put into it. But that said, like the thing I've been trying to tell myself, especially now as I'm like trying to move into a new project, is like really the work is about showing up, and it's about showing up every single day. It's about flexing that muscle every day. It's about knowing that you're going to have like the good writing days and the bad writing days. And that some days you're going to, or a lot of days in my case, you're going to be writing stuff that you think is complete shit, but you still just have to keep showing up and hoping that like, and just knowing that like it's all part of the process. And I think I'm just so terrible with that, yeah, it's such a reminder. So right now what I've been doing is like forcing myself to write, and I put a timer on because as soon as that beep goes off, I'm free. But I give myself like half an hour to an hour every day, and I just like, and also and try to and just try to show up and write, even if it means I'm scribbling or like jotting down notes. It's all part of the process. And I think for me, it's been so important to understand that writing isn't just the time that you spend physically writing, but it's also the idea generation. It's, what you're doing when you're in the shower and you're putting together the pieces, like all of that's part of the writing. So part of it's also just about being compassionate with yourself and understanding like, okay, yes, you might not have sat down and like written 50 pages today, but you're doing all kinds of other work in terms of like what's going on up here in terms of the story. Um, yeah. Oh, here's a
Oh,
question.
yeah, go ahead. Do you ever
Do
feel
you ever feel
apprehensive? Yeah.
apprehensive about sharing something you wrote because you're afraid of how it might be received? I mean, all the time, especially, I mean, there's a couple things. As someone who, thanks for that question, as someone who explores the personal so much in my writing, I'm always sort of nervous about what my parents and my friends and family will think. Um, because especially with my family, I'm really cautious. Like I don't want to portray this sort of like conservative uh, brown immigrant parent narrative that we see so much in South Asian like art and movies and stuff. Like for me, one of my big agendas has actually been repeatedly trying to show what does it mean to have um, a supportive brown mom as opposed to the one that we constantly see, or the parents that we constantly see. So I think I always try to write the people around me with love and care. I do tend to write first and then ask permission after because I think I owe it first and foremost. I have a responsibility to the muse to tell the story, and sometimes um, if I get too distracted in like what other people will think, that chain, it can take me down to a place that interferes with the writing. So I try and really focus on the story and writing from a place of love and care. And then if necessary, like if I know that this person's going to read the book, I'll talk to them about it. I'll ask for permission. I'll show it to them, that sort of thing. So I really try and write from a place of love and ethics. I think the other thing that I'm constantly worried about is like, I think when you're marginalized, we tend to be hardest on our own. And so, when I put out a book like Even This Page is White or I'm Afraid of Men, like I'm not really worried about what men are going to think or what white people are going to think, but I'm often just worried about what brown people are going to think, what queer people are going to think, what trans people are going to think. And again, I'm always open to criticism. I'm open to, like, I want to be accountable to my communities. But I think that, as someone who's also experienced call out culture, often the ways in which people have responded to work that they haven't liked hasn't come from a place of respect or care or kindness, and has just come from a place of often what I have received as a bit of meanness or mean spiritedness. And so I think anytime I put out art in the world, I am often like worried about like what people in my community are going to say. And so I think the way that I navigate that is by trying to get a lot of feedback in the process. I think the only way to make good art is to like do it collaboratively. And so I try to like make sure that lots of eyes are on it. So that way, if there's something that I've missed, if there's something that's politically like wrong or insensitive, that people are given the opportunity to give me that feedback in the creative process. But also, I think part of it is understanding that, like, as corny as it sounds, there are going to be people who just don't like your work, and people who don't like what you do or who misunderstand what you do. And like my job as an artist, as much as I like would love to please everyone, I just genuinely can't. And I think that's one of the hardest things I have to grapple with as an artist, is the fact that I genuinely can't please everyone with my art.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great article. You know, uh, our head of growth sent it to me about from the cut, which is after Never Have I Ever came out. The number one lesson I think a lot of people are learning is you can never make an entire diverse brown community completely happy
Yeah.
ever. And that's
Yeah.
something we do at the Juggernaut every day. Like I get, hate mail from the entire spectrum because, at the end of the day, all we can do is try to be true to our mission and try to learn, but it can be really hard to please everybody.
It can, and I know that sounds like such a cop out, and I think it's like for me, it's like less about pleasing everyone and also understanding that like I have to have space to learn and grow. And unfortunately, with the internet, there's sort of an expectation that you know everything and that you like because of your platform or your privilege or whatever, that you have an insurmountable amount of knowledge, but like I don't know every term, I don't know every politic, I don't know every history, and like I try to stay educated, I try to stay informed, but there are going to be places where I have gaps and I want to learn. But I hope that, I guess my whole thing with Call Out too is I just wish we could learn from a place again of care. And I think that Call Out can be really useful when we're talking to people in dominance, like so when we're calling out white people. But I think in our own communities, sure, there are people that have certain more privilege than others, and especially if you have a platform, you have more privilege than others. But I think that there are ways that these conversations could happen, so that learning was coming from a place of actual growth, as opposed to what I often feel, which is learning from a place of fear.
Yeah. I hear you. I'm constantly like, oh my God, is this going to be the day that we say something really bad? What's next during our last few moments left? Like, it seems like you're working on a new project, you're writing something new. Would love to leave with, your thoughts on what's next and also what you're reading, probably.
Sure, yeah. So what's next for me is this year actually marks the 10th year anniversary of my first book, God Loves Hair, which I self-published in 2010. I don't know if I have a copy of it somewhere here. Let me just see. Yeah. Wow. So I self-published this in 2010. Yeah, this bad girl over here. And yeah, and since then it got picked up by a publisher in 2014, and they're doing a special 10-year anniversary edition for the book this year, which will come out in the fall with a new story and a foreword and a preface and a new illustration, all that fun stuff. So God Loves Hair, 10-year anniversary in the fall. I also have an imprint called VS Books, where I try to publish and work with, well, basically VS Books offers a mentorship and a publishing opportunity to one emerging BIPOC author every year and a half. And last year we published a book called Shut Up You're Pretty, by an author in Scarborough by the name of Taya Matanji. And this year, VS Books is publishing a book of poetry by Cicely Bell Blaine, called Burning Sugar. And they're one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Vancouver, incredible poet, incredible activist. And so look out for Burning Sugar. And so those are sort of the main things that I'm working on. And then in terms of what I'm reading, actually, they're kind of right behind me here.
Yay!
The books that I didn't even plan for this.
Of course you did it. It's perfect.
Ted Chang, science fiction author. I teach science fiction in the university, so I'm often trying to figure out like what's happening. And just to really, he wrote the story for the movie Arrival.
I love Arrival.
Yeah, Arrival's so good. Anyways, he's just very, very good. He's not, and he really interesting author because he's not super prolific. Like I think he takes like 5 years to write a short story, which in our world is like, there's just such a force to be like creating all the time. So I find him very inspiring. Amber Dawn, a Canadian poet, My Art Is Killing Me, just put out this new book. We were supposed to go on tour together for the Subtweet and her book, but unfortunately the tour got canceled. So highly recommend. Also, I'm sure everyone's heard of this one, Girl, Woman, Other. It won the Booker Prize this year. Really, really interesting stuff around form happening. And then lastly, The Great Believers. It's a dual narrative, and one of the things I found really interesting is half the narrative takes place during the AIDS epidemic, and it's just been really interesting thinking about the AIDS epidemic right now, and like sort of the similarities between this particular pandemic and the differences. So highly recommend this one as well. Yeah, those are my books.
This was so wonderful. I feel like we can be friends and keep talking forever.
Yeah.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed it because Vivek is just so many words of wisdom here. So
well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. This was so nice. Oh, let's do it.
Yeah,
yes.
Let's do this one. Don't forget to check out the Subtweet. It's awesome. It's really wonderful. We don't say that lightly. We love it. So
yay. I really, really appreciate your support, especially as like someone who's like doing work with South Asian communities. I wrote this for our people, and so like having this praise from you just really means a lot. So thank you so much.
We're happy to support. Take care, Vivek. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.